Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the late start. We had a little technical difficulties, so thank you for hanging in there. Thank you again for joining us for our fifth webinar of our 12-month series, Staging Persons with Dementia. Our program will be recorded and can be found on our Anthem YouTube channel in the coming week. Please keep your cameras and your microphones off until our Q&A portion, at which time you can either type your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we will unmute you. We are once again delighted to bring to you a legend in dementia training, Dr. Tam Cummings. Dr. Tam, as she is known in the dementia community, is a practicing gerontologist who has devoted her professional career to educating both professionals and family caregivers. In 2009, she founded the Dementia Association with the mission to inspire, educate, and empower dementia caregivers. At Anthem, we utilize her transformative work, including the Itty Bitty Dementia book, in our daily conversations with families of those with dementia. You may have already received your copy of the Itty Bitty Dementia book from your local Anthem community. If not, it is available on Amazon. Families, professionals, and caregivers, it is an honor once again to present to you Dr. Tam.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, y'all, for being here today. This is usually a presentation that families are very eager to find out information about, because you hear so many different things about how to stage a loved one with dementia. And the reason, Chris, that we want to stage someone with dementia is it allows us to determine how progressed the dementia is. That in turn tells us how much brain tissue this person is actually missing, what areas of the brain are most likely damaged, different tools or for different forms of dementia. And so we're just going to sort of walk through how these different tools work, where you find them, and how you use them. I'm going to tell you, if I don't remember later on tonight, you're allowed to look at staging tools tonight, but do not read them every day. You'll be like we were in graduate school when they gave us the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Illness to read. The next day we came back, one of us was schizophrenic, one of us was bipolar, one of us had severe depression. We had picked up all the clinical features of everything we'd read about. So the same thing happens when you read a staging tool. So as we go through the tools, there'll be certain things we'll stop and talk about. And then at the end, if you have questions, do our very best to answer everything for you. So as we get started tonight, want to remember to remind everybody to breathe. This is hard things that we are talking about. And for some of you, this is the first time you're hearing this information. But remember, Anthem has this series on their website, on YouTube. So don't just start with number 4 or today number 5. Go back and start with number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, because each chapter is building on what you learned previously. And as you know, this is a very complex set of diseases. And so we want to make sure that we always remember to give the caregiver a way to regain their balance and to take care of themselves. And one of the easiest things to do is breath meditation. And understand, while I said that, yeah, it's easy, but it's also one of the hardest things to do. A very simple way to start is with this breathing technique. This is called where you breathe into 4, but you breathe out to the count of 6. The reason your out breath is longer than your in breath is that by doing that type of breathing, you will naturally begin to slow your body's respiration down. And you're trying to go from 13 or 14 breaths a minute, which is normal, and even higher when we get excited or agitated, down to something closer to 8 breaths a minute. And so by breathing out slower than you breathed in, you manage to make your body do that. Now, Chris, if you do this for 4 times, which is what we're going to do, that's great. And when you go visit your loved one at Anthem, before you ever get out of your car in the parking lot, do 4 breaths. When you finish your visit with your loved one, before you get back on the highway, do 4 more breaths. So, Chris, if you begin to do this and you find that you're doing it for 5 minutes and then 10 minutes, and every time your mind wanders off, you just come back to breathing, you'll find that you're actually doing breath meditation, and that is the very best brain exercise that I can give you. Now, a variation on the breathing technique we're going to use, which is the 4-2-6 technique. Another one that works well for people starting breath meditation is to do box breathing. Box breathing is what is taught to Navy SEALs to help them be able to calm down quickly after a conflict that they've been in. And box breathing means that I'm literally drawing a box as I'm breathing. So I'm breathing into the count of 6, blowing out or holding for the count of 6, breathing out to the count of 6, holding for the count of 6. And so in my mind, I'm constantly drawing the sides of the box. And for somebody who's beginning breath meditation, that's a wonderful way to do it. The one we're going to do tonight is 4, 2, and 6, which means you're going to breathe in through your nose to the count of 4, hold your breath for the count of 2. You're going to breathe out through your nose for the count of 6. All breath meditation is done through the nose because otherwise, Chris, you get a dry mouth and that's not comfortable. So feet flat on the floor, hands up in your lap. This is for circulation and for relaxation. I'm going to count for you. So everybody deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold, hold, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold, hold, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold, hold, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Last time, deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold, hold, exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, when you get up to doing that for several minutes at a time, you're actually meditating. And breath meditation is the only thing we know that helps the brain age as well as the brain can age. It repairs neurons. It strengthens connectivity between neurons. It does not work for people with dementia because they have a brain disease killing their brain cells. But for you and I, this is the best exercise that I can give you. Now, remember that this can be difficult stuff to look at. So as a refresher, you have to remember that dementias are terminal diseases and that they are causing great damage to the brain, great insult and injury to the brain. And it is that damage to the brain that is causing the behaviors that you witness in the person that you love. It's not that they're doing something to annoy you, even though it probably is annoying you. It's brain damage. And if I did the same thing to your brain that's happening to your loved one's brain, you would behave in the very same way. For some families, the easiest way to get that one family member to make a connection and understand it's brain damage is to help them think about it not as dementia, which they don't really understand, but as brain cancer. We know, for example, that if we tell someone that your loved one has brain cancer, they will be treated differently than if we say the word dementia. And it's just because we have a better understanding as a population of cancer versus dementia. Now,
Dr.
remember,
Tan, would you mind
yeah.
to do a full screen for our audience, please? We only have a small screen right now. I think it's
Okay,
up at the top in the presenter mode or something.
great. Now we'll lose everything. How's that? Do you have a
There
full
you
screen?
go. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Because you wanted to see those brains up close?
We
Okay, so the type of dementia determines the staging tool that is used because different dementias, remember, are caused by the disease starting in different areas of the brain and moving to different areas of the brain. So there are actually different dementia tools for different forms of dementia, different staging tools. But by stage 6, which is called severe dementia, by stage 6, all dementias are considered the same because of the amount of brain damage is so extraordinary. So typically by stage 6 of the disease, the person has lost at least a pound of brain tissue. And since the brain only starts with 3 pounds of brain tissue, by the time a person loses that much tissue, you can tell by looking at them that they're sick. And now there's so much damage that the brain is really just functioning on maintaining the person and trying to keep the body alive. Now, the staging tools for dementia are based on the type of dementia that a person has. And this can be very confusing for families because they've heard about a 3-stage dementia tool, they've heard about 7-stage dementia tools, they've heard about tools that use other things. And so we just want to sort of clear some of that up for you. So let's start with the original tool. The original staging tool for dementia was a 3-stage tool, but it was built for research neurologists. It was built for people whose IQs are extremely high, and they were never people that were going to be working with your loved one with dementia. This was strictly for research. It's hard if you're not somebody with a medical background to even understand the language that is used in that 3-stage tool. So the 3-stage tool is primarily used only by research neurologists who specialize in dementia. It's not something that I would ever use in practice, and it's not actually something that I've ever seen used with a family in practice. The next tool is the tool for most of the dementias, called the Dementia Behavioral Assessment Tool. And this is a 7-stage tool that starts with you and I, because we're aging normally, and all staging tools must start with a baseline of normal aging. You and I are aging normally. We know who we are, where we are, what we are. We're not anticipating or expecting to develop dementia. So we're the baseline. In the 70s, Dr. Reisberg built a tool that was based on some of the clinical features that were noticed in the progression of Alzheimer's disease. The Dementia Behavioral Assessment Tool is an updated version of that, of Reisberg's original scale. It's an updated version that includes more clinical features to help medical professionals and family caregivers identify, by watching their person's behaviors, how advanced the disease is. And this is critical because, as you and I know, people with dementia do not look physically sick until the very end of the disease. And that's very confusing to families, to friends, to neighbors, to people at church or synagogue, because humans think if you're sick, you look sick. And in most illnesses you do, but in dementia you don't. The staging tools allow us, by observing the person's behaviors, to be able to tell how advanced the disease is. By that, be able to tell you what stage of the disease is, whether it's called stage 4 or whether it's called by its medical name, moderate dementia. It allows you to see what is coming next, and the staging tool gives you a timeline of how many years the person is anticipated to be in that particular stage of dementia. Did that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Okay, great. I mainly was looking for you. If it made sense to you, then everybody's with me. Then FTD began to be, there began to be more and more research on the FrontoTemporal dementias. And these are dementias that are telling you the bulk of damage is occurring in the frontal lobes and the temporal lobes. And it's simply where it starts in those 2 lobes that determines which one of these forms it is. So we have a separate staging tool for FTD, the FrontoTemporal dementias. And remember, it's not one FTD, it's which one of the FTDs. And later on tonight, we'll talk about some of the FTDs only occur if another FTD is already in place. Some of the FTDs also join some of the other dementias. So this is a different staging tool. It's still 7 stages, but it's laid out somewhat differently, and we will go through that. The last of the staging tools that we use routinely is the chronic traumatic encephalopathy staging tool. And this is a 4-stage tool that is more similar to how you think of cancer being graded in stages of 4 rather than stages of 7. So somebody with stage 4 CTE would be somebody with very, very advanced dementia. And the 4-stage tool is due to how aggressive this dementia is, and also because there still isn't that much research that's been done on CTE. Basic things that we know, the youngest male to die from CTE was a 13-year-old. This last year, we had a 17-year-old male die from CTE. This is a very dangerous disease. It comes from playing a very dangerous sport, but it is staged differently. And so we'll go through that tool when we get to it. Is everybody with me so far? Feel like you are?
Yep.
All right. So here's our 9 most common forms of dementia, just to remind everybody. And each one of these dementias starts in a different place, moves at a different rate, might be more aggressive the younger a person is, slower the older a person is. That part's not understood. We know that some of these dementias will join other dementias, that is now commonplace. It's much more common for your loved one to have multiple forms of dementia than it is for them to simply have one form. So we know, for example, Parkinson's disease dementia has now been pulled under the Lewy body dementia umbrella and is considered a variant of Lewy bodies. We know, for example, if a person has Lewy bodies, we also anticipate that they will have a high probability of developing Parkinson's disease dementia, and that will then be followed by Alzheimer's dementia. If the person has Parkinson's disease dementia, then we're watching for the onset of Lewy bodies, followed by the onset of Alzheimer's. If a person has any dementia, they could also have a cardiovascular system that has caused them to develop a vascular dementia. And so a person with alcohol dementia, number 7, Wernicke-Korsakoff, could also have a vascular dementia. And then between the two of them, if you have any dementia and live long enough, Alzheimer's is going to creep in as well. So there is a connectivity between these dementias. And the current thought is not, does your person have a dementia? It's which dementias does your loved one have? Now, the older they get, the less likely some dementias are going to be. So my mother's in her 80s. We're not expecting FTD for her, frontotemporal dementias, because she's simply too old for those dementias. Other dementias are inherited, like Huntington's. So in my family, we're not looking for Huntington's because my family doesn't have that genetic marker. So different dementias give us clues as to the type of tools that we should use, or to being very open to my loved one having more than one form of dementia. And it is incumbent upon me to give the doctor that information. That's what's going to work best for my loved one. So the way I take this is I simply remove the dementias I know my mother cannot have. And what I go back to the doctor with is much closer to what dementia she actually has. So for example, my mother never played football, so I can take off number 9. My family doesn't have Huntington's. I can take off number 8. My mother's never had a drink of alcohol in her life. I can take off number 7. She doesn't have Parkinson's disease, so she can't have Parkinson's disease dementia. I can take that one off. She's too old for the frontotemporal dementias. That's a younger person's dementia. She doesn't have those hallucinations of Lewy bodies, so I can take that one off. But she fits a lot of the criteria due to cardiovascular disease. And because of how long cardiovascular disease takes to develop to a dementia, there's a high probability that Alzheimer's is there as well. So with my mother, I would use these 9 dementias to go back and talk to the doctor about number 3, number 2, and a combination of those is number 1. And then from that, I would know to go use my dementia behavioral assessment tool, because that's the tool made for those dementias. Did that make sense? I'm
Yes,
waiting to
thank
see.
you.
Okay. Now, in my field, because of what I do and it's so specialized, I typically don't meet people or families until their loved one is at least in stage 5 of the disease. And the reason for that is stage 5 is when there's now enough damage to this person that it is evident to family members, to concerned caregivers, to people around them that something is wrong there. But one of the things you and I commonly see when people visit memory care is they come in and they say, my person doesn't look like that. And what they don't realize is because you're looking at your person every day, you don't see what we see. And so this is a classic picture of ladies who are in stage 5, 6, and 7. And in each one of these stages, you can see a remarkable change in decline. One of the ways that you can help a family to see this decline happening in their loved one is to actually go back to your iPhone, pull up a picture of your loved one picture from each of the last 10 years, blow their face up to where their face is the picture on your screen, and you'll realize as you put those together that the person you thought was smiling at that party 10 years ago wasn't smiling. And you'll begin to notice that that is something familiar in all the pictures, that the vacancy in the eyes is now beginning to show more and more and more. So as we look at this picture, let me just go through these last stages, because this is typically where, as professionals, families begin to reach out to us for help and assistance. The lady in black who's holding her hands out, who obviously has terrible arthritis, so we want to make sure we check her for pain every single day. But this lady's very engaged. She doesn't look ill yet. She's still got a lot of flesh on her face. Her body doesn't look like she has declined a whole lot. She's very engaged with the activity director, who's just out of the picture. If you can see the picture well enough, there's a starfish and some seaweed on the table. They're talking about a day at the beach. Now, that's a stage 5 person. She is what we call all dressed up and ready to go. She does not look sick yet. It's only in talking to her that she begins to repeat information. And over time, I've noticed that she's beginning to repeat it more and more frequently and ask for the same information again and again. The lady behind her in the blue, she's a little out of focus, but you'll notice that there's almost a hostile, paranoid look about her. There is a vacancy in her eyes. That lady is in stage 6 of the disease. Anybody looking at her, meeting her, would know that this lady is ill. The final lady in the picture who's leaning forward, who doesn't have emotion on her face at all, that's a stage 7 lady. That is a lady who is bedbound and is in the chair because the staff brought her and put her in the chair. She's part of the activity, but she's really just there for the socialization of being around others. There is significant brain damage with her. So understand, as a family, when you tell us my person doesn't look like that, we understand that you're seeing the stage 7 people, but you've got to trust that as professionals, we know your stage 5 person will eventually look like that as the disease continues to progress. So here we are at stage 1. Stage 1 is normal aging. And then again, on the 7-stage tools, we must have a baseline of normal. And so we're normal. We're aging normally. Most of us are going to live and die at home. We're never going to need care or assistance of any kind from anybody. You have to remember, as the caregiver of a person with dementia, as a professional caregiver of people with dementia, we have to remember that dementias are diseases of aging, but they are not normal aging. We simply see such a large number right now because the last of the baby boomer population is moving into older age, and because it's the largest population of people ever. So you have a large enough population of aging people, you have larger numbers of people who have cognitive impairment. But it's not considered a normal thing. Most of us will continue to have our brains develop into having richer and thicker connections, longer dendrites, more connectivity in the brain. The brain has more information in it. A person who's 20 years older than I am has 20 more years of experience in life that I don't have. People who are mothers or fathers have experiences about being parents that I don't have because I didn't have a baby. So the different experiences you've had make your brain thicker and richer as you age. And yes, there is some atrophying in the brain, but what people don't understand is the second part of that atrophy sentence is that brain is already so rich and thick with growth that little bit of atrophy is not anything that is to be considered of concern. With age, your brain gets thicker, gets richer, and it is only with age that we encounter something called wisdom. As we pass the age of 50, the brain actually begins to work together in a dual hemispheric fashion in a way that only happens after the age of 50. And because most of the books out there about the brain are about a dying brain, a sick brain, an ill brain, these are two of the books that are not. Get The Mature Mind by Dr. Cohen and follow that with The Creative Age by Dr. Cohen. These are two of the few books written about normal aging and what the normal brain does. You will be so excited when you finish reading these books. And Dr. Cohen, I want to say was one of the medical professors at Yale, but I may have him confused with a medical professor at Harvard. But nonetheless, very respected man, very respected researcher. And these two books he wrote before he passed, and they are extraordinary. They should be part of your vocabulary, part of your library, not your vocabulary. Now, stage 2, this is where I really want you not to read your staging tool every day. Look at it tonight and go through it, and then get a friend to go through it with you, because I grade harder than you do because this is not my loved one. I'm usually a half a stage or more in front of the family. Stage 2 is called mild cognitive impairment. That's the medical term for it. It's very subtle, it's very slow, and the person who has developing dementia will even pick up and notice and be mildly concerned that their brain is not functioning correctly. But when you try to address that with them and get them to the doctor to be seen, they dismiss it and they poo-poo it away and make an excuse, and they'll go to the doctor in the next week, or they'll call in another week or two. And so even in the very beginning, the person is somewhat aware that something is different, but when you try to pin them down to get them to the doctor, you run into a lot of resistance. Now, the reason I only want you to read the tool tonight is stage 2 says things like you forget names. Now, everybody forgets names. The names we're talking about are not the names of somebody you met 20 years ago for 5 minutes, or somebody you talked to last year for 5 minutes. It's talking about the names of people you should know. Your parents' names, your siblings' names, your spouse's name, people that you should know, people in your family. Stage 2 talks about losing things. Anybody listening here tonight ever lose their keys, ever lose their cell phone? And because you're the caregiver of somebody with dementia, or because you're a professional dementia caregiver, your first thought is, oh my gosh, I've got it too. And my first thought is, that's normal brain function. So when you read the clinical features of mild cognitive impairment or stage 2, if you're doing one or two of those, it's normal brain function. It's only a concern if somebody notices that you're doing a lot of those things and it's not getting better. Did that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, yay. So let's move to stage 3. Stage 3 is where dementia is now the diagnosis. And remember, after being given the dementia diagnosis, we also expect to be told who's going to be our specialist and which dementia or dementias does my loved one have. And we have all the testing to be able to make that determination. Now, stages 2 and 3 are considered the early stages of dementia. These are when the medications were intended to be started, but in our country, most people are not diagnosed with dementia in stage 3 or stage 2. Most people are not diagnosed until stage 5. And that's not because you're a bad family member. It's because your loved one refused to go, or because your loved one wasn't seen by a specialist. And a specialist is not a neurologist. It's a neurologist who specializes in dementia. It's a doctor called a geriatrician. You see pediatricians for little kids, you see geriatricians for older people, or a geri-psych person, a geriatric psychiatrist. Those are the 3 people that do the testing and make the diagnosis of which dementia the person has. But they also need all of the background. They need to know the cardiovascular background. And if you know your 9 most common dementias, then you're better prepared to ask the doctor better questions about which one your loved one is dealing with. And you need to know this because the type of dementia determines medicine, It determines placement for care. It determines how the disease will progress, what behaviors you will see. It determines medications. It determines which staging tool we use. And it's part of your children and grandchildren's medical history. So we need to know which dementia the person has. Now, when you look at your dementia behavioral assessment tool, you'll notice that in most forms of dementia, the person with dementia accuses their caregivers of theft, stealing from them, taking things from them, my car keys, my wallet, my purse, my bank accounts, my house, my phone, my everything. Those are commonly stage 5 behaviors. Those are classic clinical features of stage 5 of Alzheimer's and most of the other dementias. But if the person has Lewy body dementias or Parkinson's disease dementia, that accusation of theft towards a family member actually is considered a stage 3 behavior. So on your DBAT tool, you'll even see a boxed out part in stage 3, where it will tell you if the person is having these behaviors right now and everything else matches stage 3, then you need to be talking to the doctor about Lewy body or Parkinson's disease dementia, because those are common behaviors in stage 3 for those types of dementia. Also, remember, if it's Lewy body, you also want to make sure the doctor's paying attention to depression in your loved one, because depression has a crashing feature in Lewy bodies. So stage 3 is the beginning of dementia. And the next question is now, which dementia does my loved one have? Stage 4's medical name is moderate dementia. It is the middle stage of dementia. And this person is now beginning to be a little bit testy. They're more agitated. It's known as having a catastrophic reaction, meaning that if I push them to answer a question that they don't know how to get the answer to anymore, and they don't have a spouse or a child to look at to give them the answer, that I can actually make this person very agitated and very upset with me. They can make strange, bizarre, elaborate plans for suicide that make no sense whatsoever. And the example for this, and I want to caution you, because in stage 5, many forms of dementia, the person will say, I'm losing my mind, I want to kill myself. And the family thinks, oh my God, they're suicidal. Unless there's a gun sitting right there, that thought is gone as soon as they said it. But in stage 4, people will begin to make very elaborate plans. And one of the most elaborate ones I ever heard was a man who had decided that when his dementia got bad enough, he would buy a round trip ticket to Norway, fly to Norway, join the Hemlock Society, and kill himself. And he was totally stumped when I said, but you don't need a round trip ticket. And so he repeated the story back to me. He needed a round trip ticket, had to go to Norway, join the Hemlock Society, and then kill himself. And I said, but sir, you won't come back in first class. You'll be in the bottom of the plane. No. His plan continued to be the same, which made no sense. So you may, in stage 4, hear your loved one make this very elaborate plan, and you always have to make sure, is this something that they could actually do? This man had no possible way of getting a round trip ticket to Norway and doing his plan. So make sure that if you hear this, you don't panic. You just make certain that you've put every safety precaution in place and that you're paying attention to your loved one. But it's not at all unusual to hear elaborate plans in stage 4, but a much shorter plan in stage 5 that just involves, I'm losing my brain, I want to kill myself. They still have good social skills. Today I was talking to somebody from Minnesota, and they said that their person was really good at faking it. And we had to back up, because your loved one is not faking it. They are fooling professionals because the professional doesn't have the proper training to understand this is dementia. And just because I have dementia doesn't mean I've lost my social skills. And so people tend to think, if I say, hi, how are you? And the person immediately says, I'm fine, how are you? That's a sign of cognition, and it's not. It is very old memory that started the day you and I were born. So without meaning to, this person in stage 4 and stage 5 fools professionals, they fool neighbors, they fool friends at church and synagogue, they fool family members, all because the person assumes that if they were really sick, they would look sick and they wouldn't have this train of thought and they wouldn't have social skills, and they don't understand that's the disease process. You're just not fully aware of how the disease presents itself. So, as always, take out of your vocabulary that your loved one is faking it, because they're not faking, they're not lying, they're not pretending, they're not showing off, they're not trying to do things to annoy you, even though they are probably driving you crazy. They're simply trying to make things in their world make sense because the world doesn't make sense to them anymore. Did that make sense to you?
Yes, thank you.
It always sort of scares me when nobody answers. I think, oh my God, I've been offline for 20 minutes and nobody's told me because my phone's turned off. Stage 5 is called moderately severe dementia, and stage 5 is the start of the late stages or the terminal stages. And it's called the late or the terminal stages because death occurs in stage 5, 6, or 7. Most people will not live to stage 7 of the disease. Most people with any form of dementia will die of heart attack or stroke in stage 5 or stage 6, just because that's the most common way human beings die. And as we're talking tonight, if you're thinking, oh, I just wish tonight they could go to sleep and this could be over because you're watching someone you love slowly die, that doesn't make you a bad person. That just makes you human. I have never met a family who has said to me, tell us how to keep this person alive for as long as possible. Every family I have ever met has the same secret wish. Let this just be over. Let them go to sleep and let this be done. Stage 5, your person we call all dressed up and ready to go because this person keeps their scarf on. Their lipstick stays on, their earrings stay on. They don't look disheveled. Men are shaved, their shirt is tucked in, they've got their comb in their wallet. Women have their earrings, their lipstick, and their purses. They look all put together. And for some people in the beginning of stage 5, I may have to have a 45-minute to an hour conversation before it all begins to repeat itself. As they get further and further into stage 5, the repetition becomes faster and faster. And remember, when the person begins to repeat information, it indicates that the hippocampus no longer exists in their brain, and that's why they're repeating. It's brain damage. It's not being done to drive you crazy. If you take them outside of their normal home routine, you're going to see a lot of hunting and gathering. And for some families, this is when they finally are able to see that something's actually very wrong with my loved one. They take them on a cruise, they take them on vacation, they take them out of the home that they've been in. And if you've been watching the home from cameras, you would realize they're only using a very small area of the house. That's why memory care rooms are smaller than what you and I might think of. It's because that space is more comfortable to your loved one than that great big giant space. And if you watched them at home, even if it was a 4,000 square foot house, they're really only using about 200 square foot of the house. They're staying near a bathroom, near a bed, near food. And that's the normal thing for them to do. Normal for them to hunt and gather. Hunting and gathering is they go from place to place, pick up neat new things, and take it to other places. That's why Anthem tells you, don't bring the Rembrandt here. Don't bring the Tiffany jewelry. It will wander off and go hide someplace else as somebody comes through hunting and gathering. Some people don't hunt and gather in this stage. Some people Goldilocks. Goldilocks means they go from room to room to room, trying out new beds until they find one that's just perfect. Then they take a nap, wake up, and go back to hunting and gathering. The person still doesn't look physically ill, and that's what can be so challenging for some families. And they can very easily carry on the social conversation of, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. How are you? Oh, I'm fine. How's his work? Work is fine. How's your work? My work is fine. How's the weather? Weather's fine. How's your family? Family's fine. The answer to everything is fine. It's not cognition. It's a memorized social conversation that you and I begin to learn the day we were born. Because the person doesn't look physically ill, APS, Adult Protective Services, can mess up. Medical professionals mess up. First responders mess up because they're thinking the person would actually look sick. And typically only the family member realizes how sick they are because the physician is not trained in this particular set of diseases, or the physician isn't spending enough time with the person to see the behavior the family member is seeing. Stage 5 is where most forms of dementia are going to now accuse their loved ones of theft or professional caregivers of theft. It's not at all unusual that the family comes to meet with the administrator, the DON, the director of nurses, and marketing because mama told them somebody's stealing from them. And the family needs reassurance. There's nobody stealing. It's people with dementia hunting and gathering. They find pretty things and they move them to another place and then hide them. Those social skills fool professionals. They fool medical professionals. And again, it's not intentional. It is simply happening because of the disease process. Now, another feature of stage 5 is that in stage 5, Alzheimer's people become incontinent of bladder. In stage 6, Alzheimer's people and most of the other dementias become incontinent of bowel. So in most dementias, incontinence of bladder starts in stage 5, incontinence of bowel starts in stage 6, but that can be very different for people with vascular dementia. That can actually reverse. Stage 6 is called severe dementia. And again, this is one of the late or the terminal stages. The person now looks sick. They're bent, they're shuffling. You now begin to see Parkinsonian effects where the person who doesn't have Parkinson's may begin to develop a tremor, may begin to develop a movement disorder. It's not at all unusual that they may rock back and forth or have a constant and continuous movement, repeat the same words over and over again. Stage 6 is where we hear people yelling, and the yelling may be caused by a stroke. The first thing we're going to always check is for pain to make sure they're not sitting in a way that's hurting them or has some other untreated pain. But that's also a common behavior that's happening that many times is not understood. The person is now being very challenging as we try to go about the day doing the activities of daily living with them. And the activities of daily living are what you and I did this morning. And this is the easiest way I know of to help you remember it. The first thing you did when you woke up was you transferred from a lying to a sitting to a standing position. And then you ambulated to the toilet. Then you did your bathing, your grooming, your dressing, your eating. Those are the activities of daily living. And that's what we're trying to do for your loved one. We're using a social medical model to get them through the activities of daily living multiple times a day, but keep them as social as possible and feeling as comfortable and as safe as possible. Stage 6 is where the 36-hour day begins. And this can be not only that they can stay awake for 36 to 72 hours, but it also means that they can begin to sleep for 24 to 36 hours or more, and that is normal. The challenge with ADLs is now happening because as you listen to me list the ADLs, transfer means I'm taking the covers off of you and you're in pajamas and I'm moving you. Toileting is very intimate care. Bathing is intimate care. Grooming, dressing are intimate care. And so we can have challenges from a person, not because they're being combative, because they're mad at us, but they're being combative because they don't understand what we're trying to do for them. And we may be moving too quickly. We may not appreciate that their vision has changed. And if we're not right in front of them, they can't actually see us the way that you and I can see the world. And so we have to look at what we're doing with them in terms of, are they really being challenging, or are they just human beings who, for as long as their brain can remember, have been told not to let people touch you in certain intimate areas, and we now have to touch you in those areas in order to do proper care for you. So you may get some pushback from a person on that. And that's why it's so important that we know your loved one's history so that we can build that social connection with them. You're going to have a much easier time taking a person to toilet if I know that person, if I spend time with that person, and if everything I do with them is not something negative. And so that's why we have so many of our staff who also turn around after doing care and also help us with activities with this person, because that socialization between the caregiver and the person with dementia is so critical. In most forms of dementia, this is now in stage 6, where incontinence of bowel begins. This is also where they're 6 times more likely to break bones. This is where the broken hip comes. Stage 6 is also where the inability to see things as well as other people are seeing them has really begun to have an impact. So all of those things are listed as part of how you stage someone. You're watching for these behaviors, and if you see them, you check them off. That gives you an idea of where they are. Stage 7 is called very severe dementia, and this is the final part of the disease, and only about 10% of people with dementia live to stage 7. Most die before this. Stage 7, the person is now bedbound. They're wheelchair bound. They are totally reliant upon others for care. And if you're doing care for your loved one at home in stage 5, you're doing the work of about 12 professionals. And that's why memory care was designed for a person to move to memory care either in late stage 4 or the beginning of stage 5, so that they would get the most socialization possible out of it, because we know that that's critical. By stage 7, we're now doing total one-on-one, two-on-one care for your loved one, to the point that they have to be turned in bed. We're now having to watch them very carefully for wounds. And even though they're no longer able to safely or effectively move their body, their UTI risk goes up and their fall risk goes up, because just like a baby trying to crawl out of its baby bed, people with dementia continue to try to get out of a bed even when it's not safe for them. Aspiration pneumonia is a very real risk. It is one of the causations of death. It is considered the classic death from Alzheimer's. The person chokes, aspirates food into their lungs. They develop aspiration pneumonia. Sepsis, which is blood poisoning. Sepsis then causes kidney or renal failure. So aspiration pneumonia, sepsis, and renal failure are considered the classic death from Alzheimer's. And as the brain dies, as there is less and less of the brain to run the body, that's the causation of these behaviors that you see in your loved one. These clinical features that we are witnessing are all due to the brain damage that is occurring as part of the disease. Now, when you look at your DBAT tool, your Dementia Behavioral Assessment tool, a person with Alzheimer's goes down the slippery slope. One stage typically follows another stage. And while you may not check off everything, not everybody has every behavior. Some of the behaviors on the DBAT tool are to alert us that this could be a different dementia than Alzheimer's. But one stage is typically going to follow another one all the way through to the end. So when you do your staging tool, you will do it tonight or tomorrow. And then in 2 months, you check your person again and you start with where they were when you last checked them. So I check through midway through stage 5, I draw a line and date it. And then when I check the person again, I start with where that last line was and begin to go from there forward. I don't go back and start again at stage 3. I start with where they were then. Did that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, person who says yes. Now, vascular dementias are much different in presentation than Alzheimer's dementias. Remember, the tools were built because we knew Alzheimer's started here, then we knew it moved there, and then we knew it moved up here, and then it began to move back here, and finally it was all through the brain. Vascular dementias can be occurring anywhere in the brain. The person may have had a massive stroke in the right frontal lobe, and even though they technically have vascular dementia, they may then have the behaviors of behavioral variant frontotemporal dementia because of how much damage this one particular lobe took. So in vascular dementia, as you go through and look at your loved one, you're looking at these things. Are they all dressed up and ready to go in stage 5? Are they all lost in their own little world in stage 6? Or are they bedbound and they're in stage 7? So in vascular dementias, it's not at all unusual that the family may check some things in stage 4, some things in stage 5, but just a few things, but then some things in stage 6. It's not unusual in vascular dementia that the person begins bowel incontinence in stage 4, when with the other dementias, that's something we would see in stage 5 or stage 6, I'm sorry. And so with vascular dementia, you may get bowel incontinence early in the disease and bladder incontinence much later in the dementia process. But with the other dementias, we will typically see bladder incontinence begin in stage 5, bowel incontinence begin in stage 6. Then in vascular dementia, one of the things that I think is most difficult for families is your person gets stable. They get stabilized on medication, they get stabilized, the strokes get stopped, the blood thinner changes, the high blood pressure gets taken care of, they get a pacemaker, and you think this is as bad as it gets. It's only going to get to here. And then there's another series of events and your person stair steps down. Instead of going down the slippery slope because of a stroke that's large enough or severe enough, they may skip an entire stage. They may take a half a step down to the next stage, but they don't stabilize. And that can be really hard to understand because you think, well, we fixed everything. They're on the right medicine now. It's not what's being done now. It's the damage that has happened for decades and decades that has caused this to happen. And that's what's taken over. So Alzheimer's, slippery slope, vascular dementia begins to stair step through the stages. And these are brains that have all had different, the white areas indicate areas of stroke. And so because they're not following the routine and the progression that we know the other dementias follow, you just have to be prepared that there's more changes and there's more spottiness throughout your staging tool. On Lewy bodies, the person is moving down the slippery slope, but they don't lose their hippocampus until much later in the disease. So it's not the same presentation as it is in Alzheimer's. Remember, in Lewy bodies, a lot of times the spouse realizes something's wrong and the spouse realizes something's wrong early on. They can't quite put their finger on it, but you begin to report it to the doctor to the point that it is not unusual for the spouse to be told, nothing's wrong with your husband. You, however, need help. And it's only later on that the spouse has proven true that they had actually identified a dementia and the doctor hadn't. So remember, with Lewy bodies, there are early accusations of theft. There are those funny planking falls where they suddenly stiffen and fall like a plank. They have a rapid and very dangerous depression onset. And remember, on your tools, use your Cornell scale for depression and dementia because it's an observational tool, and just look at your loved one and check. Now, if they're on an antidepressant and they still score on the Cornell scale, they're not on the right antidepressant or they're not on a high enough dosage. If I'm on an antidepressant, then I shouldn't be able to test positively for depression. And so make that call, take that tool to the doctor and let them see the Cornell scale, that what you're witnessing at home is not being addressed by the medicine. And it's very critical that we watch Lewy body people's depression levels because they are one of our highest suicide successful groups. We have the Huntington's group, followed by the Lewy body dementia group in terms of successful suicide. They have sleep disorders earlier than other forms of dementia. So vascular dementia people towards the end begin to sleep longer and longer and longer. Earlier in the disease, stage 3, stage 4, Lewy body dementia people are already beginning to have trouble with sleep. They may sleep through the night, but remember, they're having REM sleep behavior disorder. They're kicking and punching in their sleep. They're not really getting deep sleep, even though it may appear to be. Then they get up, have breakfast, and take a 10-hour nap. The hallucinations that they have, remember, there tend to be 4 primary Lewy body hallucinations. They see children, bugs, spiders, rats, and snakes, bad people coming to get them, or they see their caregiver or their spouse having sex with everyone all over town, all out in public. And as you can imagine, that makes them very unhappy. But remember that these hallucinations go on for hours. And so this also taxes the person physically and emotionally. So you're going to still use your dementia behavioral assessment tool, but you're just going to not click off everything that you would have checked off if it was Alzheimer's, because their hippocampus doesn't die until much later in the disease. And in Alzheimer's, the hippocampus is attacked fairly early. So this person is aware of what's going on around them to an extent, and there can be some worry and some upset about it. And those things are going to be things that you need to address with the physician. They're also very sensitive to medications. Lewy body and Parkinson's people do not get antipsychotics. They get a non-typical antipsychotic, especially as they go into stages 5 and 6. That antipsychotic medication will be needed. It's called Nuplazid, Nuplazid, and it's designed for Lewy body and Parkinson's hallucinations. Now, remember, you want to go to lbda.org to learn more about Lewy body, because it does move differently than Alzheimer's does. NIH.gov, type in catalog Lewy body dementia, and they will send you a free copy of, or let you download a PDF of about a 40-page booklet on Lewy body. That's one of the best you will ever find and will really prepare you for when you visit with the physician. The FrontoTemporal Dementias have a different staging tool. And they have a different staging tool because this set of dementias is attacking the frontal lobes, which are personality, emotion, rational thought, judgment, imagination, impulse control, and language and speech. And they're also attacking the temporal lobes, which are hearing, language, and smell. So there's a lot of damage that's occurring in these different areas. And because of the damage in both of these lobes, you also get movement disorder, FTDs. So these different dementias are much different. That just didn't even sound good. These different dementias are much different. These are much different in presentation than the other dementias, and one of the major reasons is this is a much younger person. This tends to be a person in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. Some have lived into their 70s, but typically from diagnosis to end of life with FTD is 2 to 3 years. And then you have to remember they can all have Alzheimer's dementia as well. So you go to the FTD DBAT. You find the column that matches the domain of the FTD that your loved one has. So if it's behavioral variant FTD, you start on the behavioral variant column, you go down that column. If there is an X in the column, it means that the behavior in the left-hand margin is associated with that form of FTD. And what you will notice is that by stage 6, there are no more X's in any of the columns, because by stage 6, all dementias are considered to be the same due to the extreme amount of brain tissue loss. Remember that with FTD, this is similar to Lewy bodies and Parkinson's in the way that the person's hippocampus is not damaged until very, very late in the disease. And so they're aware that their brain is not functioning correctly, but because of damage in the frontal lobe, they don't care. And so for this reason, people can take advantage, especially of people with FTD, because the piece of the brain that says to you to be suspicious of this person no longer exists. And with FTD people, we find that they may have given all their money away. They may have given all of their assets away to a stranger or to a family member. They may be divorced because the family thought this person doesn't love us, and they had no idea it meant that this person doesn't know us anymore, that this is all due to brain damage. It's not that they didn't love us or don't love us. It's that the piece of the brain that holds that is being destroyed. So you're going to do the same thing every 2 months. You're going to look at your tool, And you're going to start with where you left off, because dementias don't get better and go backwards. They continue to progress until death occurs. So on your FTD tool, find the column, follow it down, and block out where you're seeing those X's. And then that will tell you how advanced the disease is in your loved one if they have FTD. Now, Parkinson's disease dementia, similar to Lewy bodies, it's now under the Lewy body umbrella, so we're going to use the DBAT on it. In Parkinson's disease dementia, the movement disorder starts first, followed by loss of cognition. In Lewy body, cognition loss starts first, followed by movement disorder. The later in life, the older a person is when Parkinson's disease begins, the more rapidly it becomes Parkinson's disease dementia. Approximately 80% of people who have Parkinson's disease will develop Parkinson's disease dementia. The other 20% die before the disease becomes dementia. It does move down the slippery slope, similar to Alzheimer's dementia. It's just that you've got a little bit higher level of agitation, and the person is aware of the decline. Parkinson's and Lewy body people will tell you they can feel the information in their brain, but they can't get it to come out. Alzheimer's people tell you the information should be there and it's not there. Vascular dementia people will tell you they know the information, but they can't find it anymore. So it's a different way that people with different dementias describe it. So you're going to use your DBAT. You're going to start in stage 3, and you're just going to be brutally honest with yourself. If you're seeing this behavior, even if you've only seen it once, that behavior has started. So one of the things is incontinence. A family member will tell me, well, she's not incontinent, she just occasionally has an accident. Well, that's like being sort of pregnant. You either are or you aren't. And if you're having accidents, that's the start of incontinence. It's just that you have family members that are paying a lot of attention to their loved one, and so you actually see incontinence begin. But it's a sign of the progression of the disease, and incontinence of the bladder is a sign of stage 5 of the disease. Now, Wernicke-Korsakoff alcohol dementia, oddly enough, there's not that much research on this, and we assume it's because of social norms or people being too embarrassed. But they're going to go down the slippery slope, similar to Alzheimer's, but there's going to be more agitation behavior, more snatchy, more grabby behavior. Typically, there's going to be more antipsychotic medication used with this person than we would anticipate being used with other forms of dementia. It's also common that people with frontotemporal dementia or people with Wernicke-Korsakoff have multiple visits to a geriatric psychiatry unit in order to get their medication adjusted and stabilized. Remember, the brain is continuing to die during this process. And so it's not at all unusual that in some of these dementias, you're staging them. You get a point to where you get behavior that's really off the charts. Your person is probably going to be placed in a geri psych unit, and it's usually a 2-week stay because the human body needs time to get rid of the medicine that was in it so they can start putting medicine back together to help your person have something more normal to themselves for the remainder of their life. Now, Huntington's dementia is divided into Huntington's, juvenile Huntington's, and Huntington's chorea. It has a very rapid progression once the disease process starts. Once the cognition issues and movement issues begin, then the disease moves very, very aggressively. This person is going to need antipsychotic medication because they do become psychotic as part of the disease. And it's going to be normal for them to have multiple adjustments during the course of this disease. And when we consider that most people with Huntington's are only in care for a year to 2 years, your person still may go to a geriatric psych unit 2 to 3 times during that time period, just so that we can keep them as comfortable as possible. They are our highest suicide group, so you want to make sure you're really paying attention to your loved one as you're staging them, even if they're very early in the disease, because they know they have it, they know who they inherited it from. And if the parent began to show symptoms at 40 and died at 43, that's very much their trajectory. then they're our most successful suicide group. So take any warning from them, any words from them about that, take it seriously, make sure that there's not an actual opportunity, that those things that they need to do that are not actually around them. And be aware that psychosis is part of Huntington's. And so this person will have a more difficult time, and there will be more challenges to medicate them, to keep them as calm and as close to themselves as possible. And then also realize this is a very challenging dementia for our professional staff caregivers, because these are younger people. We're accustomed to doing care with much older people. And when we see somebody who's in this much younger age group, it's hard on us, and we know it's hard on you as well. So just be aware, they do go down the slippery slope. And once the ball gets rolling, the disease progresses very, very rapidly. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy is graded on 4 stages, and it's the only dementia that's graded in stages of 4, which is the way that we grade cancer. And part of that is due to the aggressiveness of the disease. Part of it is due to not having enough research yet. In a nutshell, stage 1, the person has headaches, trouble with attention, trouble concentrating. They have moments of short-term memory loss. They especially have aggressive behaviors if they've been drinking alcohol, and they can explode at someone that they care about very, very much, and they're beginning to have trouble with executive function, our ability to think and carry out a plan, such as having a dinner or having a party or going on a vacation or going to work and doing what we're supposed to do at work. Stage 2 has more mood swings that are even more dramatic, more headaches, and an increased level of depression. There is a greater loss of executive function, now beginning to see more and more that they're not able to carry out the daily things that a person should be able to do. They're beginning to have suicidal thoughts, and there are even beginning to be challenges with language. By stage 3, there's increased loss of short-term memory, the continued decline of executive function, increased depression, great mood swings. Physical and verbal aggression is not unusual. Trouble with visual spatial function, so car accidents begin to happen. And then in stage 4, there is a great loss of cognitive ability, a great loss of the ability to move the body, and a much more declined person, somebody who would be closer to being bedbound, beginning to have a lot of trouble maintaining balance and physical movement, beginning to have trouble controlling bladder and bowel. So the type of dementia that a person has is going to determine how we look at it. So everybody take a deep breath, feet on the floor, deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold, hold, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember, everything you're dealing with in your loved one is brain damage. It's not intentional. It's not on purpose. You're not imagining things. You are watching somebody that you love die from a brain disease. And by staging it, it allows you to better prepare for what's coming next. Looking at the staging tools helps you understand that these behaviors are part of the disease of dementia. They're not your person being bad. They're actually the clinical clues to us as to the type of dementia your person has. And the staging tools are designed so that you can prepare yourself for what comes next, and so that you can better understand how we're able to tell you how much time your loved one has left. On each section of the DBAT and the FTD DBAT and the other tools, we have a piece that tells you the average length of time a person stays in this stage. And if your person is highly educated, if they were naturally of a high intelligence, then once they turn into stage 5, 6, and 7 go much, much more rapidly for them. And that is the effective cognitive reserve. So use your staging tool. Remember to be tough. They can either do it or they can't. Remember, it's like being a little bit pregnant. They've either got it or they don't. And sign it, date it, draw a line right there, and every 2 months come back to see where your loved one is now, because it'll show you how quickly the disease is progressing. Now, does that make sense to everybody?
Hey, Dr. Tam, thank you very much. We're getting a lot of thumbs up from your presentation.
Are we all depressed now? We're all depressed here. My work is done.
Well, as always, you've given us a lot to consider and think about. We do have a question. Are you ready for a chat question?
Sure.
Okay. Pat asks, her husband started with Broca's aphasia and now can't speak at all and can't communicate via writing either. How do you assess staging with someone like this?
That sounds like one of the communication disorders of FTD. So you would use the FTD tool. Okay. And I would go to the FTD website, which is theaftd.org, the association, FrontoTemporal Dementia.org, and click on the menu button for what is FTD, and then read the clinical features. And typically the family will point immediately to which communication disorder it is, because they recognize this is what their loved one did. But you're describing somebody with frontotemporal dementia, so you would use that staging tool. And remember, all of our tools are observational tools. We do not ask people with dementia questions because they have brain damage. How in the world would they answer us? So your tool is an observational tool, and that's what you'll use.
Right. If you have another question and you'd like to put that in the chat, that's the easiest way for us to get your questions answered. We have a few more minutes for questions. And while those of you who are typing, I'll just remind you all that the staging tools are in the Itty Bitty Dementia book, if you already have your copy. If you are looking for a particular staging tool, Dr. Tam has those on her website. And you can always reach out to any of us at an Anthem community. We'd be happy to sit down with you and talk you through the staging tools, and work with you on the resources that you're looking for. So we're here to support you no matter where you are in your journey.
And that is such a great idea, because I was doing something for a hospice group last week, and the young woman who does my introduction gave 3 specific set of criteria your loved one would need to meet to ask for a hospice order. And with great horror, I realized that 2 of my immediate family members need to be in hospice care. But because I'm the gerontologist and because I see this all day long, I didn't see it in them.
Wow.
So coming to Anthem and letting a medical professional help you do your staging tool is going to give you a better reading of where your person is. And remember, memory care is designed halfway through stage 4. We should be talking about memory care. That's when they get the most benefit out of it. Definitely by stage 5. Stage 5, you're doing the work of 12 people. If your loved one's at home and they're in stage 6, you're doing the work of 16 professionals. That's why you're exhausted. If they're bedbound and in stage 7, you're doing the work of 18 professionals. So come and let a professional help you stage your loved one. Yes, they're going to need to look at your loved one, but mainly it's going to be asking you, are you seeing these behaviors? And if you're seeing those behaviors, you're not crazy. You're witnessing the behaviors that occur when a person has a terminal brain disease. So definitely reach out for help.
And Kristen Miller is asking if you could just give those 3 ways that different types, she says, can you go over again the different ways the different types say it feels in their brain when they can't access their words? You said Parkinson's, it feels like this.
Yeah,
Alzheimer's.
A Lewy body and Parkinson's person, when I ask them, can you feel the information? Tell me what happens when you're looking for this information of what I just asked you. And Parkinson's and Lewy body people will say, I can feel it, but I can't make it come out my mouth. And it makes perfect sense if you understand brain function. The Alzheimer's person will say, well, I know I should know that and I can't find it. And the person with vascular dementia will get agitated and say that information should be there and it's not. And it's like they know somebody's come in and snatched something out of their filing cabinet, and they're annoyed about it. So the different way the person answers that question is actually another clue to the type of dementia you're dealing with.
Keith asks, if mom refuses to go to the doctor to get the confirmed diagnosis, but has 3 Cummings assessments, how do we get a diagnosis?
3 what assessments?
KOKMEN. Don't know that term.
I have no idea what that is.
Okay. Can you just in general suggest how we get a diagnosis?
I would look at the tools section on the website and fill out, let me see, if I was taking somebody to the doctor, I would fill out the DBAT. I would do the Cornell scale for depression. I would do the Hamilton Anxiety Scale. I would do the brief psychiatric rating scale. I would do the Bristol ADL scale. And those are the things that I would take to the doctor, because those are all pieces of, oh, I would also fill out the pain ad for pain. Those are the pieces of paper I would print and take to the doctor, because those give the physician, those are pieces of medical paperwork. They give the physician a true idea of what's happening at home versus you trying to explain what they're seeing. And the doctor only has X amount of time. Chances are you're not dealing with a specialist, because there just aren't very many specialists in our country. And by giving them this paperwork, you're giving them a very true example of what you're witnessing at home, and that should then stimulate them to move forward and to have your person come in for an appointment. Doesn't mean you're going to get the diagnosis, but it should certainly go a long way to helping you. You also want to try to get the doctor to refer your person to one of the dementia testing centers, and these are typically going to be in our larger cities. We have a lot of them that are located at medical schools around our country. I believe you can look under the Alzheimer's Association website in your area. They should be able to tell you, or my favorite thing, call an Anthem Memory Care and ask the marketing director. That person will be able to tell you what physicians in town are the specialists that y'all can use and trust. And doctors who do this understand that it is a great insult for me to question your brain and your cognition, and to do so can make you fighting mad. That is a human response to me questioning your cognition. But if the doctor tells this person to go see a specialist, you get a different outcome many times, because the doctor said so. And this is a generation that does what the doctor says. So part of it is working with your doctor, and part of it can mean that your doctor's bending HIPAA laws, because the HIPAA laws didn't really help us any in terms of people with dementia. So just try to get as much information to the doctor that you can. They're looking for, what have you noticed differently? Oh, one of the others is the short IQ. The short IQ code starts every single question with compared to 10 years ago today. You fill those papers out and take them to the physician, and you should get a response that you're seeing something happen in your loved one that's not normal. And understand the positive side of this is about 1/3 of the people that go for dementia testing don't have dementia. They have something treatable like depression or anxiety, or a vitamin D level's too low, or B12 is too low. They need folic acid. Their homocysteine level is too low. There's 100 common things that will make a person appear to have cognitive issues that have nothing to do, that are things that are correctable. And that includes things like hearing aids or new glasses. So it's not always a bad thing. It's trying to rule out what is happening to my loved one, so then we know what plan to make.
Thank you. We have a question about diabetes. How much does diabetes play into progression?
They tend to progress more quickly when the person has diabetes. Diabetes interferes with the blood-brain barrier and also interferes with glucose uptake in the brain. The brain has to have glucose. It's the energy of the body. The brain also has to be able to clean itself at night, and it does this through the blood-brain barrier, and diabetes begins to impact and affect that. So anybody who has diabetes, their dementia is just going to progress more rapidly.
Thank you. We had another question from the same Molly about delusional thoughts. Are those in stage 6? Just to clarify.
Well, I mean, I have issues with the word delusion. Delusion means that I have a 3-pound brain and I have a belief that's not real. People with dementia don't have a 3-pound brain, and their beliefs are not real because they don't have a 3-pound brain. So we call it delusional behavior. And the delusion, the most common delusion seen is, I can't find my purse, but you're here. So you must have stolen my purse. So the most common delusion is someone stealing from me. And I believe they're stealing from me because I can't find it because my hippocampus is damaged. So my hippocampus can't tell me where did I put my purse, but you're here. And you know, I never did trust you now that I think about it. And so we see this, what is classified as delusional behavior, but it's a different delusion. It should be a dementia delusion instead of just delusional behavior, but it's happening because of brain damage. They can't remember where something is, therefore somebody else took it from them. So a delusion is a belief that's not real. A hallucination is something they see, hear, or smell that's not real. Oh, and when does it usually start? In Lewy body people, and Parkinson's people, the delusion that people are stealing from me tends to be more of a stage 3 behavior. In the other forms of dementia, that tends to be a stage 5 behavior.
Right. And again, regarding where to find the staging tools, a few people have typed that in. I had a feeling that'd be a popular question. Dr. Tam's website.
Front page at the very bottom of the page. There will be a tiny little section at the very bottom in the middle that says tools. And when you click on that, all of these tools are available in the public domain. We have permission to use all of them. It's just that these are common tools I use because I'm a gerontologist. It occurred to me that these would be good tools for families to have access to as well. And so the doctors should recognize them, although they are specific to gerontology, but they're definitely medical tools. They're observational tools because you can't ask somebody with brain damage, does your foot hurt? You have to use your tools. And they allow you to make a better description for the doctor and to be able to follow the disease better.
Can you say a few words about dementia with a person who has a borderline personality disorder?
Information from Europe, which is where a lot of our research comes from because their medicine is socialized. So in our country, you know, we don't go to the doctor till we're almost dead because we're afraid of what it's going to cost. But in Europe and other countries, people go routinely and see the doctor. So our research on schizophrenia and bipolar disorders comes from Europe, and it seems to indicate that there is a great risk of developing a dementia that will be much more likely to be more of a frontotemporal dementia in behavior, specifically behavioral variant FTD. So being familiar with the behaviors that happen with FTD are helpful, but it's believed that those dementias or those two mental illnesses, the person is much more likely to develop a type of dementia that will look like an FTD without being a true frontotemporal dementia.
We have some great questions tonight. And this one is from Christina, who says that she's a teacher with dyslexia, and the way you described Parkinson's dementia is the way she and her students with input-output based dyslexia will describe their difficulty with the output of information. Are they more likely to develop a dementia?
We know that people with Downs will develop Down syndrome, Alzheimer's, but for kids who have other things, autism, things like that, it sounds similar to dementias because we're talking about similar areas of the brain. And so that's the only connection so far. There hasn't been research linking those kids to developing a dementia later on.
Okay.
It's
and
just
Karen,
similar areas of the brain.
Yeah. Karen says her aunt was diagnosed with vascular dementia after a brain scan showed multiple white dots and spots. She doesn't have cardiovascular issues per her doctor, but her symptoms sure are vascular dementia related. Should we be worried she might have a stroke?
Well, yeah, any of us can have a stroke. I mean, we die of heart attack and stroke. White spots in the brain can also be multiple sclerosis, so there can be some confusion there. I'd want to know some more information about it. It should be in the summary of the MRI scan, but there are white matter diseases. If it talks about white matter, then there are about 4 dozen vascular dementias, and not all of them involve stroke or high blood pressure, but they're all related to the cardiovascular system that you inherited. So I got my green eyes from somebody in my family. I also got my cardiovascular system from one of my parents. So you can have vascular dementia and not have ever had a stroke.
And I would like to ask you personally about hospice care in dementia staging. Is there a recommendation for a stage at which hospice should be ordered for a person with dementia?
Well, in the good old days, and by the good old days, I mean 2005, we had everybody from stage 5 forward we were able to get hospice care for. And then Congress figured out that we had people on hospice care for 5 years or more. And so they changed the rules and they made it much more restrictive. We encourage families to begin to ask for a hospice order as soon as you notice your loved one losing weight 3 months in a row, or there is a loss of language and inability to respond to questions correctly. When you begin to notice those significant changes, talk to, y'all have hospice providers in your communities that y'all trust.
Yes.
Use. Mm-hmm. So call the community and ask to speak with a hospice provider there. You do need an order from the doctor. It's typically going to be in stage 6 when they begin to lose weight that they'll meet the criteria for hospice. You don't need to be worried if hospice says they don't meet the criteria. It's not like they're going to forget you. They'll be back every single month to see when your person meets the criteria. Ideally, we want hospice in place the final year of life, not the final week of life. They can't even get all the equipment there. So it's an extra layer of professionals. It's an extra layer of care. It's our tax dollars hard at work. And I would love for everybody to use it. It helps our communities. It helps the person. It helps the staff. It helps the families. It gives you somebody to call in the middle of the night because they're awake all the time. It gives you a social worker, pastoral support, helps with family, helps with mediation between families that can be upset. So just a host of benefits. But by stage 6, the person is now beginning to meet the criteria for hospice care.
Laura, does that also answer your question about palliative care? She says she thinks so. All right. Any other questions before we wrap up this session?
I'm good. I feel good.
You are quite good.
I feel good about it. Okay. I also want to remind y'all, go back and look at the other videos. This will all make so much more sense to you if you start with the 5 questions you need to know about dementia, and then follow that with the lobes of the brain, follow that with how the memory actually works, what it means when the doctor says memory, then your 9 most common dementias, get your itty bitty book. And by the way, y'all's itty bitty book copy is the prettiest book copy my marketing person ever did. And I asked, could I have it instead of y'all? And she said no and gave it to you guys. But use your book, use the videos that Anthem is putting up there. Any company that is interested in educating their family and their staff, those are people you want to work with. And that is certainly something Anthem is doing. So use their website, use their YouTube section, whatever y'all's channel is. I'm sure it's Anthem Memory Care. But go back, because the more you can educate yourself about this disease, the more it makes sense, It's a little less pressure on you, takes away some of the angst and anger, some of the fear, because you understand it's not on purpose. It's just a terrible, terrible brain disease.
And with that, I'd like to remind everyone of our next session, which will be Wednesday, April 10th. And the next topic in this continuing series is activities of daily living. And we've talked a little bit about that tonight, but a lot more to come on activities of daily living on April 10th.
Yeah, you're going to learn the new tool, because the tools that are used in the U.S. were built in 1950 and 1970 for normal aging. And we want you updated using a tool that was actually built for people with dementia. So those are, again, things that help you understand it's not on purpose and help your loved one's physician understand this is a brain disease.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cummings. We so appreciate you. We hope to see everybody again on April the 10th. And please go back and look at those past sessions if you're just now joining us. If you want to share the registration with friends and family members, you are always free to do that. This is open to anyone who can benefit from attending one of these sessions. So thank you so much, Chris, Dr. Tam. We'll see you next month.
Thank you, Chris. Thank y'all. Everybody
take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Y'all too. Take care, everybody.